Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you The Shallow Grave by Jack S. Scott. This is copyright 1977 by Harper and Row, and it is one of the Harper novels of suspense, edited by the great editor Joan Kahn. So I've talked about the Harper novels of suspense before and why I'm such a fan of them. And one thing I really like about that imprint is that Joan Kahn's tastes were all over the place. And I mean that in a good way. She didn't seem, as far as I can tell based on my reading experience, to say, I like one type of book and one type of book only, so agents don't send me anything but that. No, her tastes were all over the place. I mean, she moved from really hard-boiled to rather soft-boiled to international intrigue to, police procedurals. I mean, she just had a very wide range of taste, and I really admire her for that. The downside is that you don't always know exactly what you're going to get. So if you're an adventurous reader, as I am, I kind of put myself in Joan Kahn's hands and say, okay, Joan, most of the time I find you to be old reliable, but sometimes you're going to throw me for a loop. And that is definitely the case here. But before we get into that, just a couple of things. The first is that Jack S. Scott is the pseudonym of a man named Jonathan Escott. So Jonathan became Jack, and Escott became S. Scott. So I thought that was a pretty interesting, derivation of a pseudonym, as close as you can get to the real thing without actually being the real thing. The second thing I want to say is I want to warn my viewers that this book is vile in a lot of ways. And so if you have a weak stomach or you don't have the desire to hear about scatological matters and other unpleasant things, I beg you now to hit the stop key and maybe go watch another one of my book briefings, because I can't describe The Shallow Grave without getting into some really nasty stuff. So fair warning. So first I want to tell you a little bit about my personal experience with Jack S. Scott. There's a great bookstore in southern Maine, used bookstore, huge. And that was where I discovered Jack S. Scott for the first time. The first book I read of his was titled A Clutch of Vipers. Great title. And it actually comes next in the series after The Shallow Grave. So I have not read the books in order. It does help to see the progress or regression of the protagonist. In no way can he be called a hero. I mean, I guess you'd call him an anti-hero, if you can even call him that. And I'll get more into that in a bit. And A Clutch of Vipers was so unexpected. I really felt like I had been punched in the face by the time I got done with it. Even as I was reading it, I was so horrified at what was going on in that, and the places that the author went to and the horrible things that the characters did. It was like watching a train wreck. I'm simultaneously thinking to myself, why am I reading this? And thinking, geez, I've never read anything like this before. I've got to see how it all turns out in the end. And I don't know why, call me perverse, but there was just something so distinctive about that book that I said, okay, if you come across other books by Jack S. Scott, you have to sort of give them a try when you're really in the mood for something off the beaten path. And so I picked up The Shallow Grave and a few other books. And this is where we're just going to lay flat the truth about Jack Scott and his lead character, Inspector Alf Rosher. So what I find is that Scott loves to pontificate. He starts out his books with grand, sweeping pontifications that are so cynical as to be almost humanity denying. You know, we talk about life affirming books. These are life denying books. Scott had this extremely dark view of humanity, almost like a precursor to what we see in the Survivor. I'm using my hands a lot. What we see in the Survivor TV series, how these people in close proximity just bring out the absolute worst in each other. I mean, I guess that's what reality TV is all about. But Scott kind of knew that, I think, in the 70s about, you know, just getting a group of people together, and instead of sort of sweetly following their comings and goings and pretending that they all get along and all like each other, he just has his cast actively hate, denigrate, condescend to, look down on everyone and everything. And primary among, I mean, his lead character is Alf Rosher. And I have to say, he is probably the most physically and morally disgusting, repulsive person you will ever see in the pages of a novel. He is a creep. I mean, he is physically alone. He's constantly farting and burping and spitting and doing all kinds of things that are just, I mean, I guess you could say it's a little bit like an episode of South Park, except it's not funny. And even looking at him, just to look at him, he's gross to look at too. His teeth are constantly described as brown and his skin as gray, and he's got like bad dandruff. He's always scratching his head and dandruff is flying everywhere. I mean, it is disgusting. And it would be interesting if a person who was so physically repulsive was actually quite a lovely and moral and humble and brilliant man. That's not the case. Rosher's exterior mirrors his interior. He is nasty and bitter. He talks down to and is viciously rude to anyone that he sees as below him in the social strata, and he is a toadying ass kisser to the people above him, but always with sort of a nasty edge. So the people who are unfortunate enough to work with him, they can't stand him. They hate being around him for good reason. I mean, his colleagues call him blubbergut behind his back. You know, and you can't really blame them for disliking him or hating him so intensely because he does and says foul and awful things. Add to all of this that his objectification of women goes to new heights. And again, like, I don't want to have a double standard here, but if you're a hot little stud muffin and you can get yourself lots of attractive women who want to jump into bed with you, okay. But Rosher, who's so repulsive, he still thinks of himself as quite hot. And there's not a woman who passes his eyes who does not get the gaze, usually in very vulgar and demeaning ways. And he also is so misguided as to think that women find him attractive. He becomes insanely jealous when an attractive woman looks at, flirts with another guy other than him. I mean, it would be like, I don't know, like if a woman had a choice between Cary Grant and Quasimodo. Rosher is Quasimodo. Cary Grant is any other guy. And somehow Rosher thinks that he can compete with Cary Grant. And he gets very vicious and ugly when he realizes that he can't. He's married unhappily to a woman whom he scorns. He just thinks of her as fat. And that's the word he always uses. You never even know her name. She's just referred to as his fat wife. And he can't stand her and wants nothing to do with her. So you may be asking yourself, as I asked myself, why on earth would I want to read a book like this where there's something nauseating on every page? And I'm actually having a hard time answering that question, but I do think I have a couple of answers that I'm not sure make up for the vileness of the reading experience. But the first is that if you're the type of person, reader, who doesn't like kind of saccharine cozies or cute little mysteries where, the deer eat out of your hand and bluebirds land on your shoulder, like if you find that kind of stuff preposterous and ridiculous, I could see how you would see this type of book as an antidote to that. Instead of it being a cozy, it's almost like it's the stellar opposite. It's the anti-cozy. It's, instead of the world being a sweet place where people get along and like each other despite murders happening in the background, this is a world where everybody hates each other. And it's interesting as far as it goes in terms of being something completely different. And even though I'm loath to say this, it's the truth. There are moments of sublime writing in this book, moments of beautiful insight when Scott very briefly moves away from being vulgar and focuses on something more beautiful or sublime. And those moments really glow because it's almost like, a giant gold nugget among a field of turds, right? It stands out because it's so shiny amidst the ugliness. But you have to be willing to wait long stretches between these sublime moments. And in the meantime, you may just retch and be disgusted. There's another character in this book, the officer above Rosher in the hierarchy, who he's sick throughout the whole book. He's snuffling and sneezing and coughing, and who really wants to read about that? But he also has a terrible case of diarrhea. So all throughout the book, he's constantly running to the bathroom, in a diarrhea-induced rush, and you know what happens after that, right? So do we as readers need to read this kind of shit? And I'm going to use that word because it's such a big part of the book, right? I just don't know. This series went on, I want to say, maybe 6 or 7 books. And Scott seemed to have a readership. It seems so antithetical to what any publisher would sign today. I mean, I just can't imagine on any planet this kind of book being signed and published today. Scott has a challenge that other writers have set for themselves, and that is, how do you write a book about an unpleasant, unlikable, and even hateful character? Someone else who does this, but I think much, much better, is Joyce Porter in her Dover books. And those are meant as a romp, as a lark. They're meant comedically. Dover has certain similarities with Rosher, but he's a better cop, and the writing is so clever and funny, and Joyce Porter is having so much fun with making Dover so unlikable that you kind of go along with it and you smile because it's fun to read. The Shallow Grave in any other book by Jack Escott is not fun to read. It is, like I said, that staring at a train wreck, deer in the headlights kind of reading experience. So all of that said, let me just tell you a little bit about the plot. In an unnamed, idyllic English village, a school teacher is found dead in the woods. Rosher and his men get sent down there to find out what's going on. Rosher proceeds to offend and belittle pretty much everyone in his path. He feels up. I'm sorry if that sounds, vulgar, but that's exactly what he does. The wife of the local innkeeper, and gets his just desserts. Never have I thought that a character so deserved what he got as what Rosher gets when he tries that. And through, I guess you'd consider it basic police work of knocking on doors and finding out bits and pieces of information from the villagers. It's one of those villages where everybody is portrayed as a Gladys Kravitz type who knows everything that goes on in town. And they get little bits and pieces of information here and there, and then they get one big break that leads to an arrest. But I have to tell you, I knew who the culprit was from the minute this person stepped on the page. It was so obvious. So there's really no suspense in reading this. There's no, and the truth ultimately comes as the result of a confession, which, let's face it, that's a pretty cheap way to end a mystery, right? Like a sort of, here we go, let's go through the motions, let's make an arrest so that Scotland Yard doesn't get on our case, and then let's have the murderer confess because we couldn't be bothered to do our jobs properly. But that's all part and parcel of Scott's world, right? This world where nothing really works right and nobody really communicates well, and there's a fair amount of head hopping going on in here. So the point of view shift, and whenever the point of view shifts, it's generally to have one character think negatively about another character. Hey, someone just gave me a thumbs up. Thank you, whoever you are. But I lost my train of thought, so maybe I shouldn't thank you. So in Scott's world, nothing goes quite right. People don't connect. If they do, it's on sort of a creepy, visceral, sexual level that involves almost no love at all. The one thing, and I'll add this to my list of positives about the book, is that ultimately I can see that Rosher does have certain abilities as an investigator. He's a good questioner, and he gets good information out of people. He doesn't necessarily do a lot with it, but as a policeman, he can get results. And even the people in the police station who all hate him, as the reader does, can acknowledge that he sometimes can be a decent cop. But I ask you, is reading about a person who is moderately competent as a cop, but is an absolutely vile, atrocious human being, worthy of your reading time? I don't know. You will have to decide that for yourself. I mean, I'm super curious to know how other people respond to this character, because he's just hateful. And you close the book, and when you close a book with your favorite characters, like I love my Ma Ramatswe, right, from the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, and when I close one of those books, I think, oh Ma, I'm sorry to be saying au revoir, but I know I'll see you again about a year from now, and I'm really looking forward to spending time with you again. You read a book like this and you think, I never, ever want to go near this character or this writer again. But like I said, I'm perverse. So for some reason, I've ended up reading several Jack S. Scott books over the years, always with the same impression. Sometimes I will admit I have a glimmer of sympathy for Rosher, because some of the things that happen to him, maybe he doesn't fully deserve, or even though he deserves them, if you have a heart in your chest, you can even feel sorry for a bad person who's getting his just desserts. And, you may have that reaction, even if you also are jubilant when he gets smacked down badly. Wow. So that was a lot. So, yeah. I can't say run right out and find yourself a book by Scott, because I'm afraid people will then post on here telling me how much they hate me and want me never to make another book video again. But hey, this channel is all about exploring forgotten mysteries and forgotten writers. And if ever there was a good reason to forget an author, I think Jack Escott's books provide that reason, because I really don't think they've got anything for the modern reader, or they've got very, very little. Oh, and of course, the profanity is off the charts. And, as people who watch these videos know, I'm not above letting some profanity fly once in a while. But as with the rest of the book, it's just gross and vulgar and crass. So I'm sorry if this review comes across as condescending. I think it does, but I think you have the right to know what to expect if you pick up a Jack Scott book. So enough said. Thank you for listening to my cathartic reaction to the book, and I will see you next time.